Welcome back to our series, How the Bible Was Built. In this video, we'll look at the New Testament, Part 2. As always, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let's start with the book of Acts. The book of Acts is not a gospel, but it is part of the foundation. The book of Acts is really the companion of the Gospel of Luke. We can read in Luke, the first chapter, verses 1 through 4, and Acts, the first chapter, 1 through 3. The book of Acts is considered the history of the early church. The Gospel of Luke is an account of what Jesus began to do, and the book of Acts is an account of what Jesus continued to do. The book of Acts is exciting. It has stories of stonings, shipwrecks, and escapes, missionaries traveling to new places, to people who have never heard about Jesus. It has the story of Pentecost and more. The book of Acts is mostly about the lives of Peter and Paul. It did much to make Paul popular with the early Christians. We can't quite think of it as gospel, but it is part of the foundation of the New Testament. The Gospels and the book of Acts will be the foundation of the New Testament, and the letters of Paul written to the churches would be the walls. So, with the Gospel of Acts being the foundation of the New Testament, the 10 letters of Paul to the churches made up the walls. Interestingly, the walls of the New Testament were built before the foundation was laid. Most scholars believe Paul was executed by the Romans before the Gospel of Mark was written, which was approximately 70 A.D. His letters were written before Mark sat down to write his Gospel. Question, well, if Paul's letters were written first, why are they not the foundation? The answer is because they were not collected and circulated until after the 4 Gospels were widely known and read by Christians. Did Paul intend for his letters to be Holy Scripture? No. After Paul's conversion, we can read in Acts 9, verses 1 through 9, he felt that God was calling him to preach this new gospel. So he spent the rest of his life traveling all over what we now call the Greco-Roman world, preaching and teaching and founding Christian churches. But when a quarrel or a controversy broke out in one of the churches he has founded, Paul couldn't jump on the next jet to fly in to settle the problem. The best he could do was to write a letter. So his letters then are mostly written to specific churches to solve problems which had arisen. Paul is striving to strengthen the young Christian communities. Part of his job, as Paul saw it, was to help Christians in the various churches under his supervision to understand the Christian faith. The time frame of Paul's letters. Scholars believe that most of Paul's letters, if not all, were written between 50 and 62 A.D. How many letters did Paul write? Paul probably wrote a lot more than we have in the New Testament. We have to guess that he wrote letters to other churches which somehow got lost. But today we have 10 letters to 7 churches. The following is a list of the letters Paul wrote to churches. Paul wrote Ephesians, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Philemon. Note that the letter of Philemon was addressed to an individual, a wealthy friend of Paul's. But the letter makes it plain that Paul intended it to be read by the congregation of which Philemon was a member, probably Laodicea. Paul wrote other letters that we'll get to in a second. How did Paul's letters to the churches become a collection? Our best evidence indicates that the book of Acts was widely circulated among Christians around 90 A.D. Acts tells us about Paul's life as a traveling missionary for Christianity. These letters tell of Paul's journeys, his adventures, his hairbreadth escapes, his hardships and suffering as he sought to spread the Christian faith. Must have been exciting reading for early Christians. Many of the new followers of Jesus would have known little or nothing about Paul, but when the book of Acts was published or widely circulated, they wanted to know more about him. Then when they discovered that he had died a martyr for the faith, those Christians would have recognized here indeed was a Christian hero. Were Paul's letters written to the churches recognized as Holy Scripture when they were written? No, not yet. Not for a long time, really. Though they must have been widely read in the churches and highly esteemed by Christians, these letters were not considered Holy Scripture. But about 140 A.D., a wealthy Greek Christian layperson named Marcion promoted the idea that the Christian church should sever all connection with the Jewish religion. That meant disregarding the Hebrew Scriptures as the Bible of the church. In his opinion, the Bible should only consist of the Gospel of Luke and the 10 letters that we have that Paul wrote to the churches. Though he had considerable support for a while, the church fathers eventually said, no, this will not do. They concluded that the Christian faith is grounded in the Jewish faith, and that the Scriptures are too precious to throw away. Also that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John were too valuable and too much a part of the Christian life to abandon them. So they pronounced Marcion a heretic. Heretic, a professed believer who maintains religious opinions contrary to those accepted by his or her church or rejects doctrines prescribed by that church. And so, in short, a heretic was responsible for the idea of a New Testament. A variety of writings formed the roof of the New Testament. The 4 Gospels plus the book of Acts, we said, made up the foundation of the New Testament. The 10 letters of Paul to the churches are its walls. But we need a roof. And that roof is composed of 12 books in our New Testament, which are left after we subtract the Gospels, Acts, and Paul's letters to the churches. In addition to the 10 letters of Paul to the 7 churches, there are 3 books in our New Testament traditionally attributed to Paul. They are 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. 3 little books, 2 letters to Timothy and 1 to Titus, are called pastoral letters. Instead of being directed to the churches, they are written to 2 of Paul's co-workers who were under his supervision. They are called pastoral because they offer the kind of advice we would expect a Christian pastor to give to those working with him in the church. Hebrews. No one knows for sure who wrote the letter of Hebrews. It's very different from Paul's letters in style, ideas, and historical setting. The ideas in Hebrews reflect a kind of Christian thinking popular toward the turn of the 1st century, long after Paul was martyred. No matter its author, Hebrews is well written. Its purpose is apparently to inspire a renewal of faith among third-generation Christians whose zeal may have been flagging. The 11th chapter in Hebrews is among a lot of believers' favorites because it is the faith chapter. The Catholic letters and the letters of John. For purpose of convenience, scholars group 5 New Testament books under the same name, Catholic letters. That's Catholic with a small c, meaning not Roman Catholic, but general or universal letters. They call them this because they aren't addressed to any particular church or person, but to all Christians. The Catholic letters are James, Jude, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 1st John. These letters give advice about living the Christian life, discuss what is sound Christian thought and what is not, and warn against heresy. They cover a multitude of subjects. In addition to the Gospel of John and the 3 letters of John, the last book in the New Testament, the book of Revelation, is attributed to John the disciple of Jesus. Join us for our next video as we continue the series, How the Bible Was Built. And remember, subscribe, like, and share. Thank you.